Good afternoon. I'm Dick Hermans from Oblong. Welcome to the White Hart Inn. And it seems like it's been a while since we've been here, but I didn't look to see when the last time we did something. It must have been something in February or something. But we've been doing a series here in conjunction with the White Hart and the Scoville Memorial Library since last September. And for us, in a crowded bookstore where we couldn't possibly fit this many people, it has really been wonderful to have this venue to showcase some of the amazing authors who come by and live around here or travel through here. We have the two upcoming events in this space. One is next Thursday night with Adam Haslett. His new book is called Imagine Me Gone. He's a novelist, and he's been a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize, finalist for the National Book Award, a young, astounding author. And I encourage you to come and hear him give his presentation, read a little bit from his book, and maybe even discover a new author. On June 5th, Nathaniel Philbrick, who is one of the leading historians in New England, will be here. His new book is about George Washington and Benedict Arnold. And I read a lot of history of the Revolutionary War, and there have been so many books in the past few years on this topic, but the Benedict Arnold angle has not been really explored, and he was really one of the really astounding characters of that period. So come here, Nathaniel. The trick with that, we're going to have Nathaniel at the Morton Library in Rhinecliff earlier in the day, and then he'll be over here. And we decided, since we do pay rent at Morton, there will be a $10 fee for this event, which you can apply to the purchase of the book. But he'll be worthwhile to come and see. I saw Nathaniel speak about a month ago, and he's brilliant, knows his stuff. And if you enjoy hearing historians talk about something that they know backwards and forwards, you'll enjoy that. Well, this afternoon we have someone who, he hears this probably all the time. He has like the most viewed cartoon in history.
In the universe.
In the universe. He is, I don't know if you're in the Guinness Book of World Records, but you should be, I think. Peter came to our store for our Fall for Art about 1.5 years ago. And with the great, wonderful paintings, he does cartooning, and on the side he writes novels. And many of you know Peter. He lives in Sharon, and besides being a delightful fellow, he's a fine writer. Please welcome Peter Steiner.
Thank you, Dick. I'd like to thank the White Hart and the Hermans at Oblong Books for doing this and inviting me and scaring up so many people. This is sort of a record for one of my book events. So thank you all for coming. I'm going to talk a little bit about my various careers, particularly cartooning and writing and how they interact. I'll show you some cartoons in the middle, so if you've fallen asleep, it'll be something to look at. I've been drawing cartoons since I can remember. I was drawing as a child when I was 3 or 4 years old. We lived near the art museum in Cincinnati, and my parents took me to art classes there. I'm not sure what I did at that age, but I came to love it. And I drew constantly. My father would bring home sample books from the company where he worked, and I think they were wallpaper samples or something, and I just ignored the wallpaper and filled them all with drawings. And somewhere when I was about 8 years old, somewhere around there, I came across William Steig's wonderful book, The Lonely Ones. It was in my parents' library somehow, and and I was enraptured by it. I think, I don't know if you know the book or the drawings, but they're wonderful drawings, cartoons of lonely people, and I think it probably spoke to my loneliness or let me know that I wasn't alone as a lonely person or something. Anyway, I could not stop looking at that book. And then I started drawing cartoons, and by the time I was about 12, I was a cartoonist. That is, I was drawing cartoons that were actually printed places, like the school newspaper. And the high school that I went to, the editor of the newspaper, who happened to be Jerry Rubin, I don't know if you remember who that is, but he didn't hire me because there was no money involved, but he got me to do cartoons for the paper. And it was then I discovered that with cartoons you can really attack people who are much more important than you are with impunity, and you get away with it. And I remember there was a shortage of forks in the lunchroom, and I did a cartoon of a little boy lying on the floor with a fork stuck in his chest, and one of the other little boys is saying, "Johnny got a fork." And shortly after that, there were plenty of forks in the lunchroom. So, you know, once you discover you have that kind of power, it's hard to give it up. I did cartoons through college, also for the college newspaper, and did the same stuff, making fun of deans and people like that. I don't think it had anything to do with the fact that I graduated with very poor grades. That had more to do with laziness than anything else. And then when I was in the Army, I had a friend who was on a newspaper overseas called the Overseas Weekly. It was also known as the Oversexed Weekly because they had photographs of attractive young women, but I did cartoons for them. In graduate school, I continued to do cartoons. This was in the 60s, the late 60s, so I did anti-war cartoons for a little underground paper in Pittsburgh. And when I became a professor at Dickinson College, I did cartoons during faculty meetings, and I was obviously in the wrong profession at the time as a college teacher, because when I got tenure, which I did, amazingly enough, I felt like the prison door had shut, and I almost immediately left teaching to become an artist. So I was painting and cartooning, and I did cartoons as I was submitting by then to the New Yorker, and not selling, but submitting. And I did cartoons for a little paper where I lived in Georgia called the Oconee County Enterprise. I was paid $25 a cartoon, and the paper was owned by a lawyer who also was a county executive. This is the way they do things in the South. You know, somebody who is a county executive can also own the newspaper and do all sorts of other things. And one thing he did was float a bond issue that was very favorable to a development that he was doing. And I did a cartoon about that and promptly got fired, which I took as a great honor. And I mean, it was $25, so it wasn't going to change my life. And it was odd that ever after that, all the farmers who opposed this bond issue were my friend, people who I had never spoken to before. They would drive by in their pickup truck and do the sort of Georgia greeting, you know, where they'd raise one finger, not, you know, the right finger. I showed paintings when I could, but I was still sending cartoons to the New Yorker and to a lot of other magazines. At the time, there were still other magazines that bought cartoons, like the Saturday Evening Post and the Saturday Review, and I started selling to those, but it took about 2 years of sending cartoons every week before I sold one. I sent about 12 to 15 cartoon ideas a week before the New Yorker bought one. It was you have to be nuts to do that, but I guess I was nuts and wanted to be in the magazine enough to do it. I should say that while I was in graduate school and while I was at Dickinson, I was also studying and doing scholarly work. My degree was in German literature, and so I was teaching German and German literature, and a large part of that was taking great works of writing of all sorts, but novels were my specialty, and 20th century novels, and taking them apart and seeing how they worked. So teaching was a wonderful training, even though you might not think so, for being a writer, because by the time I left teaching, I understood what the mechanics of writing were, and what distinguished a great novel from a good novel from a poor novel. That much I could tell. And cartooning, as it turns out, was also an excellent teacher, because first of all, there was a deadline, and secondly, there was a blank page, and I was never afraid of either. I always managed to fill a page when I had to, and usually with something that was serviceable. Also, with cartooning, there's a lot of editing that goes on. Cartoons are, in a way, like little plays. I mean, you're setting up a scenario, you're inventing characters, and then you're writing dialogue, or you're not writing dialogue, you're allowing the action to speak for itself. But a big part of cartooning is editing and winnowing out what isn't necessary. I should say that used to be a big part of it. Cartooning has changed. I mean, if you're still looking at the New Yorker, at the cartoons, you'll see they behave differently this way these days than they used to. Let me see. I think I'm going to show you a few cartoons now. Not that I see anyone nodding off, but I think it's a good moment before I go into the writing. And I'll try to, if I see something that I want to talk about, I will. So this is a cartoon I did, actually. I do a lot of cartoons lately about books. If you can't see it, the caption is, "Don't they usually read out loud?" I did this not too long ago as part of promoting this book. It's a good cartoon, but it didn't sell any books. This one was in the New Yorker some years ago, and the caption, it's a bar, and the caption is, "What would you boys think if we started selling books?" Okay. Dad, do all the voices. The father is reading the Bible. And that was another one I did for promoting. Now, you may notice the techniques are different. These are very quickly drawn with pencil and just to get it on the paper and done. This from the New Yorker. He's looking for something for the beach. Okay. I hope you realize that I'm the one who has to write about this stupid vacation this fall. I'm sorry, sir, but Dostoevsky is not considered summer reading. I'll have to ask you to come with me. Philosophy, religion, sanctimony. Summer reading. Okay. If cell phones were books, kind of a dream. Secondhand books, reheated coffee. That was in the New Yorker also. It comes out March 1st, gets remaindered March 2nd. That's sort of autobiographical. Dexter Addison Cranwell, 1930 to 2002, his novels. That's the way it works. That's from the New Yorker also. It's kind of a sweet. I do a lot about animals too. Dad, can you read? That was in the New Yorker also. This is a little blurry. In 6 more weeks, these MBAs will be ready for market. Okay. A double dip recession with sprinkles. That's an old one when we talked about double dip recession. Human resources. I like it after the holidays when the crowds are gone. That's kind of a sad one. Let's say we find another way to say hello. That was in the New Yorker too. Bad news, the unicorns are gay. I have to confess, I kind of stole that idea. Charles Addams did a cartoon years before of the Ark sailing off into the sunset with a couple of unicorns on shore watching it. So that was sad, but I kind of updated it. How come I always get the crying baby right behind me? On the other hand, we can be reasonably certain no one is carrying a weapon. Okay. Whoop. Can you go back? Oh, you do the hokey pokey, that's what it's all about. Don't worry, it's solar. That's in the New Yorker too. That's the last one. There's more. So around 1990, my father was ill, and he was dying, and I wanted to sort out our relationship. So I started keeping a journal. I'd never done anything like that. And to be honest, it was pretty boring. I didn't find it interesting. I didn't find it helpful or useful. So I decided I would populate my father's conflict with me, and it was a mild conflict. We didn't have too much to disagree about. But I decided I would populate our conflicts with a fictional father and son and see if that made it more interesting. And it did. And it sort of turned into a novel all by itself without my setting out to write a novel. When my father died, I stopped writing just because it felt like the wind had gone out of my sails. But a while later, I went to France for, I think it was 3 weeks by myself to finish writing this novel. And it was December, and I took long walks through the fields in a long overcoat that was flapping in the breeze. It was very romantic. And I wrote for 3 days, more or less, 3 weeks, and finished the novel. And I enjoyed that so much, I started writing another one as soon as I got home. And it took place in the village where we had bought a house in the village in France where we had bought a house not too much before that. And that one became my first published novel. It was called A French Country Murder. And I found an agent through a friend of mine, and the agent asked for 40 pages, and I sent him 40 pages, and then he asked for the rest of it, and he liked it. And he found St. Martin's Press, who was willing to publish it. They published it as a mystery. They called it a mystery. I didn't think it was a mystery, but that's what they called it, thinking, I think, that it would sell better if they called it a mystery. And the main character was a person of my age, roughly, and my temperament in some ways, a little grumpier, a little smarter than I am, and with a much more interesting history. He was a former State Department CIA guy, and he retired to France, and his past kept catching up with him. And so he's been my mainstay throughout all 5 novels now. And the writing has changed a bit. The stories used to be more linear. They've gotten more meandering, even less mysterious, and certainly less thriller-like than they used to be. My publisher insists on calling them thrillers. And I have a fight with them, but since I have absolutely no power in the argument, they still come out as thrillers. The first one's played in France and entirely almost, and nowadays I write all over the world. This new book takes place in New York, in France, in Russia, and in Pakistan. And Pakistan is where the book begins. So I'm going to read you a little bit at the beginning of the book so you can get a sense. I should say before I read this, the book is called The Capitalist, and it's kind of about, well, the subtext is my rage at capitalism, but it's about a man, a character named St. John Larimer, St. John spelled St. John, who has a Ponzi scheme in the Madoff mold, but he's a little smarter than Madoff, and he sort of gets away with it. And my CIA guy, ex-CIA guy, is somebody who is damaged by this Ponzi scheme, or somebody close to him is damaged by it. And he goes after St. John Larimer. He does it in entirely extra-legal ways. He has no power, and that's kind of his modus operandi. And in the book, I try to sort of follow the food chain in capitalism from the bottom to the top. And so it starts out in Pakistan, in Lahore. When the fire alarm sounded, Abhinash Chanda, a 16-year-old seamstress, jumped up from her singer and ran toward the exit. "Back to your station," yelled her supervisor. "It's only a test of the alarm system. Everyone back to work," yelled the other supervisors, waving their arms and blocking the aisles. "It's only a test. It's just like on Monday." It was true. There had been an alarm on Monday that had amounted to nothing. Abhinash went back to the singer while the alarm continued sounding. She finished hemming the silk pocket square with the embroidered Pascal logo in the corner and slid it to the finishes box. She earned 10 rupees for every 10 pocket squares she hemmed. The hems had to be sewed neat and straight with tiny stitches, which took time. She'd been hemming squares for more than a year. On a good day, she could earn 200 rupees, over $2, which meant she could send money home to her mother and sisters. Abhinash finished another square before she smelled the smoke. The Kavreen Style Factory in Lahore, Pakistan, an immense 6-story building next to the mosque, a half block from the old Lahore Canal, was on fire. Bolts of cloth stored next to the generator had smoldered for a while before bursting into flames. The factory walls were brick, but the stairs and floors were wood and were littered with fabric scraps that ignited with explosive fury. The supervisors had disappeared. Abinash ran with the others to the stairs, but the stairwell was filled with billowing black smoke. You could see flames below and hear the screams of the workers on those floors. Pandemonium broke out on the 6th floor. Women and men screamed and wailed and ran about, first in one direction, then the other. One old woman, her name was Safia Atwal, sat at her singer with her eyes closed, her lips moving, her hands folded on her lap, and her body rocking gently back and forth. Smoke was seeping up between the floorboards. All the windows were covered with iron bars. Abinash ran to the farthest window, where a young woman and a man squatted on the sill, kicking furiously at the bars. A wailing siren came closer and then stopped below. The woman and man continued kicking. When the woman fell back exhausted, Abinash took her place, kicking at the bars. The bars did not move, but the two kept kicking. Down below, the firemen dropped the ends of their hoses into the canal and turned on their pumps. Great goots of brown water surged through the hoses and struck the fire with a hissing noise. More fire trucks arrived, and soon there were hoses crisscrossing everywhere. The firemen aimed the nozzles into the flames, but the building was an inferno that no water could quench. The firemen could not go into the building. They couldn't even get near enough to place a ladder against it. And even if they had been able to, their longest ladder would have reached only the 3rd floor. They could only point the hoses and gaze into the fire with shiny, sooty, despairing faces. Many hundreds of people, mostly women, had come out of the building. They stood behind the firemen staring into the roaring inferno, or looking away toward some imaginary place where this could not happen. No one came out any longer. On the 6th floor, the bars on the window, which opened onto a side alley, suddenly came loose and crashed to the ground 20 meters below. The young man screamed at the crowd on the road until someone noticed and began yelling and pointing in his direction. The first person to jump was gravely injured, and people rushed in and carried her off. Abinash and the young man tried to hold others back, while people below piled up debris under the window, old furniture, palm fronds, mattresses, upholstered chairs, blankets, anything they could find that might break their fall. Some women had tried to make a rope from sheets of uncut silk pocket squares, but when they hung it from the window, it then went down only 8 meters. The heat was terrible. It made it hard to breathe. People pushed past Abinash and jumped, sometimes 2 at a time, landing in the tangle of those who had jumped before them. Abinash looked around. The 6th floor, mostly empty now, was burning. Through the thick smoke, she could see all the sewing stations in flames, like so many pyres, along with the carts that had been used to carry away the finished work. Safia Atwal, the old woman, was still sitting by her singer. She was on fire and still rocking back and forth, back and forth. Abinash slid down the silk rope as far as she could, and then, after a moment's hesitation, she let go. The Couturier Pascal, with offices in Paris and New York and showrooms in Paris, New York, London, and Berlin, and Hong Kong, learned of the Kavrine-style factory fire when the New York Times called. "I'm working on a feature about the safety conditions in the factories of your South Asian suppliers," said the reporter. Well, I can assure you, said Serge Palmer, Pascal's vice president in charge of public relations, that we regularly inspect the facilities of all our suppliers to make certain they adhere to the highest safety standards. Did you inspect the Cavrine style factory? If so, you must know it was a fire trap. The alarms were faulty, there were bars on the windows, there were no emergency exits, no fire extinguishers, and there was highly flammable litter everywhere. Why are you asking about Cavrine, said Serge. It burned to the ground in June, said the reporter. 274 people died, and many hundreds were injured. 274, said Serge. My God, that's terrible. He said, and he meant it. But Cavrine is not one of our suppliers, he said. We used them once, but after an inspection of their factory, we stopped using them. We haven't used them for 2 years. And yet, said the reporter, their logbooks show orders from Pascal, which were being fulfilled the week of the fire, which was just a few weeks ago. That's not possible. It's not only possible, Mr. Palmer, it's true. Pascal has a new line of neckties and pocket squares, among other things, called Insouciante, that came out this summer, a striped field with an embroidered logo that was manufactured by Cavrine. I can show you the logbooks and the order numbers and the shipping bills. There was silence at the other end of the line. Finally, Serge said, I'm certain your information is incorrect, although he had a sinking feeling that it wasn't as he hung up the phone. The Insouciante line, which included ties, scarves, skirts, shirts, blouses, bags, pocket squares, and other items, all with narrow charcoal and dove gray stripes, capped with the embroidered silver P, was enormously successful. They were prominently displayed in exclusive shop windows. The pocket square sold for $260, the necktie for $350, the scarves for $950. They couldn't keep them in stock. Pascal had sent someone to inspect their Asian factories 2 years earlier. They had then left it to their overseas agents to find new suppliers to replace those factories found wanting, either for quality or safety reasons. The agents mostly waited until the inspector, a junior executive, left the country, never to return. And make certain those items are taken care of, said the junior executive one last time as he was being driven to the airport. He shook his finger to show that he was serious. Yes, sir, said the agent. You will certainly see that has been done when you are next here. It'll be taken care of, sir. Once the junior executive was gone, the agent renegotiated the company's arrangements with the factories, including a small consideration for himself to ensure that the factory would remain in the supply chain into the foreseeable future. Yes, Abdur Pandit admitted. Of course ours is an old building. He was the owner and founder of Cavrine Styles. He had built the business from nothing, sewing on an ancient singer he had bought while still a boy. The machine had been old and in serious need of repair and had cost him almost nothing. Abdur had taken it apart and replaced all the worn gears and frayed wires. He'd collected cotton remnants and sewed aprons day and night, which he then sold to the local mutual department store. Before very long, he was able to hire others, first only those with their own machines, to do the sewing while he searched for new outlets. Through an agent, he had finally gotten the contract for Russian aprons and house dresses. Abdur expanded his enterprise, moving from one cramped space to another until the abandoned colonial hospital became available. He bought the building and had been making improvements ever since, adding a freight elevator to move supplies to the 6 floors and then to remove the bundles of finished products to the 1st floor, which were inspected and packed for shipment. He reinforced the sagging floors, rebuilt the stairs, and installed dozens of sewing stations on each floor. He installed a generator to deal with the incessant power outages. It's an old building, but it's perfectly safe with exits on each floor that lead into wide stairwells. Not like our competitors with their narrow, steep, unlit stairwells and cramped and dangerous workspaces. It was once a hospital, after all. He was sweating. He mopped his brow. It might be a jail the way it is now, said Vikram Rob, the agent. There are bars on the windows. He studied the checklist of violations his junior executive had left behind. There are no toilets. Without the bars, people steal my cloth by the yard, by the bolt, I should say. They throw them out the windows to their confederates below. Without the bars, I'm out of business. What am I to do? And what are people to do if there's a fire? The discussion had spiraled around in that manner, with promises that toilets would be installed, that a fire escape ladder would soon be installed, until the revelation came that the junior executive had instructed Vikram Rob to find a more compliant supplier. I'm very sorry, he said. It is out of my hands. If it were up to me. Finally, a figure had been named, and Vikram Robs signed the new contract. So, wow, I've been talking a long time. I think I should take questions if you have them, or if not. Yes?
You're familiar with the Triangle Waste Factory?
Sure.
Yeah. It just reminded me of that and wondered if that was anything you drew from, or just that these things happen.
Well, as it happened, when I started writing the book, there was a series of these fires. This is not a made-up fire. I mean, I made up the place and the name of the company, but there was a series of fires in Bangladesh and Pakistan where hundreds of women mostly died. So the Triangle was a century ago, but it's still going on.
And after Triangle's changes were made.
Here.
Here.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Pakistan is another story. Yes?
Speaking as someone who's also from Cincinnati, what was your favorite work of art at the Art Museum?
Oh my gosh. You know, there's a local painter in Cincinnati who's not known outside of Cincinnati. And I can't name a particular work, but his name is Frank Duveneck. And he did wonderful paintings, and they are pretty much forgotten. So I would have to say Frank Duveneck in general. But I don't remember. I was 3 and 5 years old, when I was going, so I don't remember looking at any art. I just remember drawing. Well, thank you all for coming. I appreciate it, and I hope you enjoyed it.